call to order this meeting of the special meeting of the Public Safety Committee for December 3rd, 2019, and ask for roll call, please.
Chairman Plaka?
Yes.
Alderman Kramer?
Present.
Ms. Sky? Alderman Lockmiller?
Here.
And Alderwoman Sims is absent.
Thank you very much. Second item on the agenda is the approval or amendment to the agenda. Are there any changes that any of the committee members want to make? No? None. The agenda will stand as approved. There are no announcements. There's no city administrator's report. The reports of the committee, the chairman has no report. Alderman Kramer?
No report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Alderman Lockmuller?
No report.
Thank you. And Alderwoman Sims is not present. There are no department reports. There's no consent agenda, and there is no, there is old business, I'm sorry, and that is the reason that we're here. It's the Center for Public Safety Management. The addendum that was produced relatively recently, it was distributed to the board on November 21st, I think. It is 60 approximately pages, 54 pages long. I'm assuming everybody on the committee's had a chance to review it. Tom, have you had a chance to review it? Do you have a copy with you?
I do.
Okay, I was going to ask some. I was going to open it up to questions first, and then I have some questions too, but I thought I'd reserve them. I also have the July 12th engagement letter that CPSM sent to the city, and I also have, and we've reviewed this once before, and I'm not doing it to rehash it, just to refer to it, and that's the December 31st, 2018 memorandum that was produced by our Brentwood police force having to do with the strength of the force of the various other communities in the area, and then also having a comparison about population, a comparison about retail, and sort of a recommendation at the end, if you recall that report. So I would open it up at this point to questions by anybody on the committee.
I just want to mention that Dr. Dove Chelst from CPSM is on the phone.
Okay.
And prepared to do
great.
a summary of the report if you like.
I don't know that I would love to be able to ask questions.
He's,
Okay.
Dove, can you hear us?
Hi. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Alderman Kramer, do you have any questions? Would you want to go ahead?
Did I hear it correctly? He was going to do a summary first, or we have?
We can ask him to do a summary. That'd be fine. Sure. Would you rather have that? All right.
Me too.
Please, a summary.
Dove, go ahead.
Oh, sure. Okay. So CPSM was asked to conduct a data analysis that used the current, call volume for comparison against the previous study, which we conducted roughly 3 years before. So the lab study went from 2015 through 2016. The new study used data from 2018 through 2019.
Dove, I guess as you know, we pretty well continuously patrol our streets. Is that time considered when a patrol officer is just driving around? Is that a contract patrol, or what? How do you rank, or what do you call that type of activity in this study?
Well, I mean, I was looking at whatever was recorded in the dispatch center. So that was, I'm just trying to remember the name of your dispatch center. I think it's
ECDC.
East Central Dispatch Center.
Right.
So whatever got radioed in. And at the same time, I mean, if you were thinking about it, if I had patrol officers driving around town, if they were driving more or less, would I suddenly say I need more people just for officers driving around town?
All
I
right.
mean, if that's what they're doing, if they're not, stopping people or responding to calls, is just driving around town a reason more?
All right, thanks.
Somewhat rhetorical.
Go ahead. I've got a few questions, but Alderman Kramer, do you have any questions
Sure.
at this time?
Just confirming, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. I don't know if he can.
Let me get closer.
Okay, hang on a second.
Going from the equator to St. Louis over a cell phone.
Dove, can you hear him?
I think a little bit. If not, hopefully you can just tell me what he's saying.
Okay. Go ahead, Tom.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Here's my question. So, my understanding is from our previous meetings, the department is asking for added resources. I think a couple of officers, and they're also seeking to create a strategy for our commercial corridor while still covering our residential areas. And so the question is, it seems as though your study findings on the update kind of fell in line with the previous study that we have enough resources. And so I guess you're familiar with the department's request to try to create a commercial strategy. Are you of the opinion, post this update, that we have enough resources to do what the department wants to do right now?
Okay, so I guess I read a document that was sent out around the end of 2018, and it had different parts. One of the parts were, we have all these calls for service, way more than other departments in the area. So really, what this study does is it can address that issue, right? The calls for service are the things that are documented in your dispatch center. And what I'm saying there is, yes, you have more calls for service, but it really speaks to the nature of what you're documenting. The department is documenting just different kinds of calls for service than I suspect their neighbors, which I'm not saying is bad or good. I'm just saying that seems to be what's happening. So it's not so from that argument that there's so many more calls, we must be busier. I don't know if that argument, holds as much weight if you look at it more carefully. And of course, our position is generally it's not always the best idea to compare, one department to another, because it's not always apples to apples if you're just looking at calls, right? So that's the takeaway. Now, I don't know. Now, there's a discussion about commercial, right? I mean, commercial policing of a commercial area versus a residential policing, and some concern about some, allocating resources to deal with, I think it was, some larcenies and nonviolent crimes. I guess that's kind of a different argument. Did I answer at least enough of your question?
I think so. That's all I have for now, Mr. Chairman.
So I have a few questions. Yeah, that's easier. I don't know how it's easier for him to hear.
If you speak into the microphone.
Okay, all right. Dove. This is David Plufka. I've got a few questions for you. I want to start with the document that's dated July 12th by CPSM, which is your engagement letter. Are you familiar with that document? It's a single page.
I mean, I don't have it up in front of me, but okay.
Okay.
I can try and.
So I've got just a few questions about that document itself. In the second paragraph, CPSM refers to the previous Brentwood Police Department reporting process as referring to activities as, quote, non-committed time. And CPSM in this document, July 12th, was critical of the use of that word and said that what that really referred to was random preventative patrol, which you then turned into a phrase that you described as directed patrol to mean community-oriented policing, selective traffic enforcement, preventative activities, and public education. Would that be what I just described? Would that be consistent with your understanding of what CPSM refers to as directed patrol?
Okay, let me see if I can find the documents.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see what I can find. I see a contract now.
It's a letter dated July 12th.
The last page of it? No, that's not it.
What's the date?
July 12th.
Oh, July 12th. Let's see, I have something from July 19th. But.
Well, so let me just ask it this way without reference to the particular document.
So non-committed time, I mean, I can just clarify this. Non-committed time is the time that officers spend on proactive activity,
Okay.
right? Things that are highly interruptible. We usually have some hierarchy, right? If someone dials 911, that's something you have to, assuming it's an emergency, you got to get to it. If you're going to do some self-initiated activities like traffic enforcement, that I guess you would break away to deal with a 911 call. But that still is going to take up your time. And there's, let's say you have out of service activities you're going to have to do on your shift. You're going to have to fill out your paperwork, you have to gas up your car. It's a bunch of stuff you're just going to have to do. But after you take account for all of that, or court, all of that, after you account for all of that, there's this uncommitted time. And we say, officers should not be busy 100% of their time doing the things that I've illustrated, responding to 911 calls, self-initiated activities, like traffic stops, or paperwork or things of that kind. They should still have some time, 40% of their time or more, to do proactive activities, to drive around neighborhood, to interact with citizens, and do things on their own initiative.
So my reason for bringing this up,
when we discuss non-committed time,
right?
Sometimes that gets recorded, and sometimes it doesn't.
So my reason for bringing that up is not so much to understand what your definition is. I'm trying to figure out from the report how it was defined. And if I give you several examples, can you confirm for me at least that are examples of things you would describe as directed patrol? Bank detail, foot patrol, keeping the peace, checking a park, community relations, school crossing, station assignments, things like that.
Do you have a page number?
Okay, hold on a second. So as far as what was recorded in our records, right? There's a listing of what was listed as directed patrol. I think even beyond that, some of that stuff, I guess you would have to do. There are park checks, there's vacation checks. You've got like you said, you've got bank details, keeping the peace. The largest, the most common of the three that were listed as directed patrol was foot patrol.
challenge you. I'm gonna challenge you on that. I'm gonna challenge you on that in just a minute. But at least what we understand, I think, is that directed patrol, those predictive, proactive strategies, you excluded those from the calls in your main analysis. You said so in the third paragraph of your executive summary.
The only thing we excluded was contract patrol. That's the only thing we excluded.
Right, but what's the difference between contract patrol and directed patrol?
We only did it because, we asked them we asked the department what's contract patrol. And based on the description, I mean, that's how it sounded. It sounded like, non-committed time where officers are told to be in a specific area, and they're not, other than that. And for two reasons. There was that, and also when we tried to measure how long it lasted, the measurements were all off. And so that led us to conclude that, what could we do with it anyway?
So what could you do with it anyway, since there wasn't, in your mind, an accurate measurement of what time was being spent in these activities? Even if you wanted to include them, you had no practical way to do it.
Well, so then the department said, okay, so here's an activity. We send an officer to a location, and they're there for roughly 2 to 3 hours every time. And so, if I hear that, and I compare that against, let's say, responding to a crime or that occurred, that sounds like go in an area and drive around.
So let me ask you a question. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
Is that what it sounds like to you?
well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but let me ask you a question about that. You said a minute ago, if I hear that, in actuality, you're reading it, aren't you? You're not. The information you're talking about is coming from the CAD information. You're reading that data. You're not having a conversation with an officer in Brentwood asking them, hey, how much time, when you go check a park, how long does it take you to check a park? You never had that conversation, did you?
Okay, so what I did was I contacted the department and I said, we have these tens of thousands of contract patrols. Can you give us some information about it? And what I said when I talked to somebody, I meant that's what I was referring to.
How many conversations was that? Do you recall?
I think it was a bunch of emails. I can't say it was a ton of conversations. Maybe it's 4 or 5 emails.
Okay. Were there any conversations over the phone?
No, I don't think so.
So going back to my original question, if you had a problem trying to figure out how much time was being spent on.
So let me ask you a question. If
Okay.
somebody drives around the park, so as opposed to driving around somewhere else, why wouldn't I call that an example of proactive activity?
I'm not sure you wouldn't.
If the 911 call comes in, they're going to stop driving around the park. They're not going to say, well, hold on a minute. I think we need more officers. I can't stop driving around the park right now.
That's a perfectly legitimate. That's a perfectly legitimate.
Seriously?
That's a. You just said.
I'm busy driving through this park. A crime's been committed. I can't stop and go respond to that crime.
You need to let me talk because I'm agreeing with you.
I apologize. I interrupting you.
I'm agreeing with you that certainly somebody driving around a park who gets a call would be called off from driving around a park. My concern about the report addendum is that nowhere reflected in this percentage of time being used, that 32% that you're quoting, is reflected in that park driving. You refer to park driving and other proactive activity as the same as if, because it's a non-issue, it would be the same as if they were sitting at the police department, or if they were going to get their squad car filled with gas, or if they were on a meal break. None of those activities have any impact on that 32% you talked about, or the 52% peak that you talked about, and yet, at least some of the activities, the proactive activities, the bank checks, the business checks, walking through Target, driving through neighborhoods, doing a number of things, those activities, for the most part, and I would say for the lion's share, don't get reflected in this percentage of how much time are they spending on reactive and proactive police work and how much is uncommitted time. Wouldn't that be fair?
I'm sorry, that was a little. Can you say that again? I guess there was a lot.
Sure.
That you.
It wasn't so much. I wasn't having a quarrel with your analogy to say, or your example to say, somebody who's checking out a park could be called off because of a 911 call. I totally understand that, and I totally understand your phrasing in the report that says that proactive time is flexible from that standpoint, and I totally get that. My point in bringing it up is what I'm concerned about in the report is that you excluded it from the analysis in that percentage. You excluded it. You said in the last line of that second paragraph, for this reason, we excluded most of these calls from our main analysis. So those kinds of activities, because they're flexible and because they're proactive and not reactive, they didn't make it into the percentage analysis that went into the ultimate conclusion of whether or not our police officers were spending 32% of their time against potential, or 52% of their time against potential, or 28% of their time against potential. What I'm talking about, the bank checks and the other things, those things didn't get into that analysis. Wouldn't that be fair to say?
The only thing that didn't make it into analysis is a specific call type marked contract control. I've got a paragraph here, if you like, that it said here,
But
the category contract and patrol is an in-service function of our offices.
I'm sorry, can you identify the page number you're reading from?
Dove, what page? Dove, what page? What page are you reading from?
Oh, I'm reading from an email that I received. It says a typical shift of riding all of our streets in these areas takes approximately 5 hours of their time. And it says this program has been successful from a community policing perspective as we regularly receive accolades from our citizens about patrol saturation of their neighborhood. So what this is saying is that each unit spends 5 hours of their 12-hour shift driving, in a specific designated area in Brentwood. But of course I don't have any information from within the CAD system to confirm this, because when I tried, the average length of a contract patrol call was not 5 hours. But this is the case. Okay, so then 5 out of 12 is about 40% of their time. They're spending 40% of their time, let's say, driving in a designated area each shift.
Right. I understand that. But I understand the point you're trying to make. So let's turn to pages 34, 35, 36 of your addendum report, and
Okay.
and maybe this will 34, 35, and 36. Maybe this will graphically help explain the point I'm trying to make, or the point I'm trying to ask about. You graph out patrol, directed patrol work, out of service work, police initiated work, and community initiated work. It seems to me that in those two graphs, what you describe in the next page on page 36 is a numerical analysis of only community initiated work and police initiated work. You exclude from that analysis out of service work, directed patrol work, and patrol, which I think you would call contract work, I guess.
Yes, I'm just repeating. The only thing that's taken out is a specific call type marked contract patrol. Anything else stayed in.
Well, so then let me ask you.
We left in contract patrol to the extent that at any time it was recorded and lasted more than 30 seconds.
Okay, so then let me ask you to explain then some of the numbers.
I'm sorry?
Let me ask you to explain some of the numbers. If that's true, on page 36, you say winter community initiated work was approximately 12% of the hourly deployment during the week and 10% of hourly deployment on weekends. If I look at the graphs that 10% and 12% match up to just 2 of the shaded areas and excludes.
Just one, just the orange, just the orange. That's the community initiated.
Right. So that's my point. Is when you're drawing the conclusions about the percentage of officers, the workload issue, and turning it into number of officer workload. So it's a part of an officer. It's 9/10 of an officer, 1.2 percent of an officer, or 1.2. So meaning one officer plus a little bit. You've excluded from this analysis. You've excluded their time spent on patrol and directed patrol work. And that's my question: is the directed patrol work? The directed patrol work under that umbrella would include some of the things I've already described, correct? And so why is that excluded? Just because it's flexible?
Again, the line you quoted, which has 12%, that's just the community initiated. That comes in from the 911 system. That doesn't even include self-initiated work. And the line below it that says all work includes everything that's shown. Okay? All 4 items that you see.
There's 5 items
Everything
listed.
you see is included.
There's 5 items listed: patrol, directed patrol work, out of service work, police initiated work, and community initiated work. Where do you get 4?
Yeah, okay. It's true that there are 5 items in the legend. The top line just refers to how many personnel there are at any given time, and the other 4 refer to the work being done by those officers at those times, on average.
Okay. So then, well, if that's true, then I don't know that you. Well, I mean, okay. So for the summer of 2018, you list that the peak amount of personnel that this was 14%. No, I'm sorry. That it was 0.5 under initiated work, and that all work in the summer was 1.2. But if I look at 1.2, if you include those 4 topics, including directed patrol work, doesn't the number reach far closer to 2? Just as an example, under figure 20.
Okay, so you're talking figure 20.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the observations you're looking at correspond to the average over the entire day.
Okay.
So it does reach a peak of 2, but if you average it out throughout the day, it's done. 2 is the highest. At other points it's the lowest. So it averages out to something above 1, but 1.2. So you see averages on page 36. If you want some measure of the peak, you'll get that on page 39. So that's where you'd see the percentages shown as peak.
Okay. And that's where the peaks hit at a point. I know this is referring to the 8-week period of time, correct? This is that 8-week sample that we're dealing with now?
Yeah, because sometimes there's a difference in winter and summer.
I totally get it.
It can be because workload tends to go up in certain parts of the country in the summer, and paradoxically sometimes you'll get a reduction in available staff because people will be taking vacation. So we compare summer and winter.
Okay, can you remind me what the peak percentage was in the previous report? Do you recall that?
I think it's higher here. If you want the peak percentage, sure. Let me open it up.
Well,
Sure. Let's see. So the highest it gets is 45%, and that's in the winter on weekends.
Okay. And in this
here,
report, it
goes up as high as, I think, did it reach 52? It went up to 52 now.
It did. Okay, so going back to and I'll finish with this. Going back to my original question, you're telling us that in this report, only so other proactive strategies, proactive, predictive patrol strategies, such as some of the things I described, the bank checking, checking houses at vacation time, making runs through Target, checking parks, things like that. Are you saying that those activities are reflected in the ratios that you describe in this report?
Yes, everything that's not marked contract patrol is reflected in this report.
So how do you know that there aren't some contract patrol entries that refer to that kind of activity?
Well, I mean, we have different records. Some are marked park check, and others are marked contract patrol. I mean, how do I know that? I don't. I mean, it's possible somebody meant to do a park check and wrote contract patrol anyway.
Okay. And other than the 4 or 5 emails, that was really the extent of your contact with the police force?
No. So, I mean, we do correspond for the most part through email.
Right.
And whenever an issue comes up, that's when we discuss it with them. At the very beginning, we ask the department who's their patrol force. We ask them about their shift structure. We give them a list of all the call descriptions, and we try and classify them into groups. You'll see that there's a list of maybe 10 to 20 different descriptions in our table.
So was that
And,
was
we
that
started out with many more, but we attempt to classify it, and then we run it by the city, by the police department. We say, hey, this is what we've done. We'd like your input. So we get their feedback as a result.
Did you get feedback in this case?
Yeah. In fact, I think we got it twice. I think we first got it from data analyst, and then the chief wanted to make some corrections, so we adjusted accordingly.
And all those conversations or those connections, those were by email, or those were over the phone, or what?
I think most of what we do is via email. Sometimes it's over the phone, but I would say most of it's over email, and that helps because it's documented.
Let's ask it this way. Did you have any conversations, you personally, have any conversations with the Brentwood Police Department?
Did I think I called Tom Bottini. I don't know if I spoke with the chief. I guess I don't have a log of my phone call.
Okay.
But I don't recall recently speaking with the chief.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Chief?
Yeah, Dove, can you hear me okay? This is the chief.
Absolutely. Oh, hi, chief.
Hi. A couple things about this whole conversation you just had about contracted patrols. We
Absolutely.
instituted the contracted patrols as a process for accountability for the officers. As part of that accountability, what you saw from ECDC and the numbers that you garnered from ECDC were the officers calling out in a particular neighborhood, which we provided to you. Every shift, they would call out in those neighborhoods and ride the streets of those neighborhoods. What you captured in your data, unfortunately, was they would call out of service, and then in service, the dispatcher would put them back in. The reason for that was they were doing community policing type work. That way they were still in service, which allowed them to answer their radio calls. And we could double check that using our GPS data that we look at on a daily basis. So in terms of an accountability tool for us and our officers, that's the way we manage their patrols. Unfortunately, when you look at it, what you're looking at in terms of time committed, you missed out on 4 to 5 hours of patrol where the officers were actually on proactive patrol, and it's not reflected in your report. That's why it's not reflected. Because the dispatchers were put in service.
I'm sorry. I interrupt you. Continue, please. Sorry.
What you were seeing is they call out on a contracted patrol and then put back in service. We did that so as the management portion of the police department, we could see that they were in those neighborhoods, called out, We wanted them to call back into service, which they did, and they do on a regular basis. That's why, if you're strictly just looking at numbers, which is what this report reflects, and then you start graphing those numbers and try and capture time spent by officers, you're missing 3 to 5 hours of what they do on a daily basis within that call out and doing community policing work. That's what's missing in this report.
So I think it's great. I think it's great that when officers are not responding to calls for service, they're not just sitting around, in a specific location or at the station. They're going out and they've got a place, an area of town where they're supposed to be, right? And they're supposed to be driving around and making their presence known. I have no issue with that, right? And I think it's it's definitely a strategy that's an improvement to what was happening 3 years ago.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
Hi, I got here a little late, so this may have been addressed, but it was my understanding when we wanted to get this updated report that one of the things that would be evaluated one of the concerns we had was this car clotting that's happening late at night, and the idea would be if we the request or the evaluation towards whether to add on additional officers, and part of that would be to specifically address that problem. I didn't find anywhere in this report where that was addressed. Did I miss that, or can you point that out to me?
No, it wasn't addressed. You're right.
It wasn't in the scope of work. It was just a conversation that was had at this committee. It was never in the scope of work.
I thought that was one of the things that was to be addressed.
And we brought the scope of work and made sure the committee approved it before we took it to the board so we could amend it, but that was never part of the scope of work.
They were informed of that on the 21st of July. I sent an email myself personally to them, and I have a copy of the email where it clearly states this is the reason why we asked for more police. Dove, you remember that email I sent you on July 21st? I copied several people on the email. Leonard was copied on there as well, but in that email, it states the reason why and that was about 3 or 4 days after the contract was executed.
That may be legitimate, but if it's not in the scope of work, they can't execute on it. You're changing what the board agreed to.
I guess I have to go back and look at it. I thought the whole point, I recall the member, chief comes to us and says, hey, we want additional officers, and this is one of the reasons why we want to do it. And we didn't, and we wanted to have a report that would address that concern. That's my, I'll go back and watch the YouTube footage, but I don't.
We can all go back. That's not my recollection, because I know that the first proposal I brought forward, I was corrected that what we want to look at is workload, and I'm sure maybe that's reflected in the minutes, and if not, we can obviously go to the video. My whole point is we can't change the scope of work after the contract's been executed.
Okay, but in any event, it wasn't addressed.
It wasn't in the scope of work.
Right, that's my question.
Does anybody have any more questions for Dove or with regard to the CPSM study itself? Tom, do you? I'm sorry. No? Okay. So thank you.
Thank you, Dove.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
thank you
click
very
off.
much. Okay. Thanks very much.
No problem. My pleasure.
I wanted to bring up one other thing, and then ask about whether there's any sentiment within the committee about making any kind of motion here. There's a Brentwood Police Department memorandum which gets to some of what Alderwoman Sims mentioned, and specifically having to do with the strategy of why we were looking for, where the city was looking for, the police department was looking for the addition of a couple of officers. Chief, do you want to, I know you've talked about it before, would you mind talking about it again?
Sure. During the course of 2018 in the Public Safety Committee meetings, you and the other aldermen in the committee asked me, do we need more officers? And as part of that conversation, there were two areas of concern. in 2018, keeping in mind that I got here in March of 18. Two areas of concern that we quickly identified were retail crime and nighttime crime. And as the more that I stayed here in 18, the more concerned, and it is nothing but been worse each month as we go by and watch what goes on in these neighborhoods around us and in Brentwood, is nighttime crime. So as we looked at your request, we created this document that shows the comparative study between Brentwood and 18 cities that are in the proximity of our town. And we prepared this document, forwarded it to the city administrator, and then on to the committee for review. And as part of that document, and this was at the end of 18, I attached a comment to it as coming as a executive summary of the document, stating that the two major concerns are retail and that nighttime crime issue. And I think, Mr. Cluffy, you asked me how many officers I think we needed. I think my recollection was I told you 4, 2 for retail and 2 for nighttime crime. You asked that would we be able to be assisted by 2, which is where we're at today, basically. So, but in this document, there were the study of comparative cities. Many of the cities that jump out in terms of manpower compared to what Brentwood has. The closest comparator is Richmond Heights, who sits at 41 officers, we're at 28. We're very close in terms of the population. We have more calls for service than Richmond Heights has. Similar to retail, population's almost the same, and they're sitting with 41 officers currently.
If you look at the end of that CPSM report, there's an analysis of crime that I think kind of bears out what you're saying. DePere, Maplewood, Richmond Heights, and Brentwood all have similar, I mean, the violent crime rates are low, almost non-existent. The property crime rates are 50 times.
Okay, you're on.
I'm sorry, 52. The comparison to violent crime to property crime in those 3 cities compared to Brentwood, it's a similar ratio. Where, and that refers to not only daytime crime in the retail, but that in terms of overnight crime, colliding cars and things like that, I would imagine too.
Yes.
If you were provided in 2020 the budget to hire 2 additional officers, how would you use them?
They would be deployed on a night watch program, and they would be more than just officers riding at night. There's a lot of intelligence information that can be garnered from other cities. The city of St. Louis has a carjacking task force that regularly they meet every other week, and in that task force, the players that are doing this type of crime are known. It would give us an opportunity to really study crime outside the city of Brentwood at night. So those 2 officers would be tasked with that style of review of crime or patterns. It would allow us to have a defined way to use our messaging trailer successfully as possible. Those officers would be using that trailer on a regular basis. And it would allow an information sharing with other departments that we don't have. So I think that eventually it may evolve into something where our neighbors like Ladue, Richmond Heights, and others are really getting hit harder than we are, may be interested in collaborating in some way to try and affect this crime. So those are all the things that we could do with 2 officers on a night watch, along with the fact that they'd be patrolling at night.
Right. So would that increase the amount of officers on patrol in the evening hours?
They would be night watch officers, probably somewhere around 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And they would work 8-hour shifts as opposed to 12. They would have whatever their days off would be. We have done strong analysis. Mr. Bottini's done a lot of analysis of when our crime occurs. And ironically, Friday and Saturday tend to be our weaker nights. I think it's date night, so we tend to have less of these. Sunday is a strong night, so that they would have to work Sundays, for example. So it would be an analysis of the patterns and then deployment of the officers, but they would be on night shifts.
Does anybody have a question for the chief?
Why not, well, let's back up. A lot of the ward meetings we have, Major Hawkins shows up and shows our ward compared to the other wards. And in our ward, crime is rather low, and we all know why it's Ward 1 because of the location of the highways. Why not redeploy the officers that we have instead of having them in low crime areas move more towards a high crime area at that time of night?
We do. So as you look at the GPS data, when Major Hawkins looks at the areas that are getting hit, might be Brentwood Forest, might be York Village, it depends on where they hit. Kind of the central corridor, just north of Blitzinger gets hit, for some reason gets hit. So that moves around, and it allows us to be able to deploy the officers on nights. And here's what we tell them. You have a responsibility to ride all 7 neighborhoods and all the streets of Brentwood in 12 hours. So if you're on nights from 6 to midnight, get those southern and less hit streets hit. And then typically we ask them to more saturated patrol in the north end of the city late at night, because that's a more frequent area that we're hit. To your point, you have a highway there. So that's going on already, but keep in mind, on many nights we have 3 policemen working. Oftentimes 1 or 2 of them's out of service, write a report, arrest, whatever they're doing. So you may be down to 1 or 2 cars, in effect, riding for hours, and this would add eyes and ears and a strategy and an intelligence piece that we don't have on nights.
And during the report that was done during this time frame, were we down any officers or
We were down,
positions?
yes, sir, we were down off and on. We've been off and on, I'd say 5 officers, right? Right now we're down 3, and have been down 3 for months, and we'll be down those 3 for another several months before we get hired. 3 officers, so that wasn't even considered in the study in terms of manpower. So early in the year, we lost 2, 1 to retirement, 1 to termination. That wasn't considered in there. Now, as we said, we had 2 more retirements and an officer going to the FBI. That's not considered either in terms of workload management.
How are we going to fill 2 additional, are we having a hard time trying to fill our current positions now?
We have applicants now in a pool that closes next week, and we'll begin the testing process, but that, there's a process to it that takes probably at least 6 weeks. They have to take tests, they have to be interviewed, they have to go to a psychological review. So, realistically, we're probably looking at February.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the trailer, has that, or any arrests been made from information received from that trailer?
We've had several LPR hits off the trailer, so which allows us to get there quickly, and honestly, we're just running them out of town a lot of times, which is okay. The other thing that we see is our crime is down, especially when you look at Ladue and you look at Richmond Heights and you look at Maplewood, the cities that are right on our borders. They are getting hit frequently that we are. We're deploying that trailer, and it's a guess, but we're deploying in areas that we think is a typical ingress area, McKnight, Brentwood. We match it up with a decoy car. In law enforcement, it's kind of hard sometimes to really quantify what you're stopping, and I think this is a good example. I can tell you that the car cloudings are less than our neighbors, and I think that, I believe the trailer is a piece of that? Yeah, it's not a stop all, but it's certainly a piece of it, yes.
And then some of these other cities that you have in your report, have any of them ever done it, this type of efficiency study we did, like with CPSM?
Not to my knowledge, I don't think they have.
Okay.
If they have, I haven't heard about it.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions? Alderman Kramer, do you have any questions?
I do not.
Okay, so thank you all for coming to this meeting. I appreciate what you guys dug in on all of this. Is there any sentiment on the committee to make a motion to include in our budget, to make a change to our budget, to include 2 additional officers for 2020?
I would support that motion. I think that, I think there were some issues with this report. I think that there's, the vault was hit, in the middle of the night. I mean, this is a real problem.
Yeah.
The one that I think we have a way of addressing it with additional police officers. I mean, I'm sorry that this report didn't. I thought it was going to be addressing this targeted issue, and it doesn't. And then, the preparer, I didn't catch his name since I got here late. Acknowledged that there were certain aspects that just weren't quantified. So, I don't think that I think there's enough information and evidence to proceed on approving, recommending that 2 officers be added. In that it's just not a bold-faced I'm going to do it despite the report that we commissioned. I think that there's enough that we've discussed tonight that outweighs that report as to why we should consider having adding on two additional police officers. So that I would support that motion, or that's my sentiment if that's what you're asking for, as opposed to a.
If you want to make that motion, would you make that motion? Do you want to make that motion?
Yeah, I'll motion to recommend that 2 additional patrol officers be added in the 2020 in the year 2020, or do you need a more specific motion than that?
I think that's specific enough. I would second that motion. Is there any discussion about that motion? Steve, sorry.
Car clouding wasn't identified specifically, but if you look at the time frames in here, we know when the incidents usually occur, and we're still not, whether you like this report or not, getting anywhere close to that 60%. We're still spending 30% or even in that time frame. It's just something I point out.
I think that's a really good point. I would only say in response is that although it's not really reflected in the way I question this report, I do think, to Alderwoman Sims's point, I think the report misses the point I was trying to make when we first brought this up. I know how we got to where we are, and I'm not placing blame on anybody, but I'm just saying I don't think this report gets to answer the question that was posed when we first talked about this, and that has to do with the notion of 2 additional officers for a specific purpose. This is 2 additional officers to try to become more proactive about something that has been plaguing our community for some time now, and as a way to throw additional assets at that, not because our current workforce is overworked necessarily, but because deploying some group specifically on this issue, I think has some real logic. It has some real logic to me. Whether or not the balance of our police force is understaffed by this analysis.
And you don't think, once we are fully staffed, that there can't be 2 officers assigned to that type of a position?
I
We're
think
living
that's
without
possible.
them now.
Yeah, I think that's possible. I think this study, with its flaws, I think this study would demonstrate that that's probably possible. I'd acknowledge that. Alderman Kramer? Yeah.
Yes, hello there, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate the opportunity to have some input here, and the city has been down this road several times before, even dating back previous administrations, about whether we could, should, fiscally responsible to, or morally responsible to make changes to the police force. And it's always been explained in the past as it's a long-term agreement. It's not a short-term adding payrolls, adding benefits, adding police vehicle or added resources that go into this type of a decision. Just as we have relied heavily upon our comprehensive compensation study, data and recommendations to make decisions for, and also preclude requests for compensation changes. I feel good about the fact that we all agreed, or I feel maybe most of us agreed, that it was a good idea to have this update. And the update, I thought, was supposed to be exactly that, using apples to apples methodology that they tried to use before. It's not a perfect study at all. As Alderman Lockmiller And I guess maybe as we have found out, maybe in the past, there are other cities that don't do this. I think would be commended for going down the pathway of at least finding out as much data as we can, whether there are some flaws, and I agree maybe there are some. But again, this is $145,000 to $175,000 per year on an ongoing basis decision, and you know, is it a political question, or is it data and a fiscal question? And I see both sides. In Brentwood Forest, as you know, we get an awful lot of attention for the car cloudings that we have on a regular basis, and you know, every morning I open up the Nextdoor app and I'm like, oh my gosh, seriously? Some of the folks are very brazen. On the other hand, I do feel like under different timetables, maybe the deployment of our officers has been adjusted, or maybe was in some neighborhoods seen more often or seen less often. I have an enormous respect for our department leadership. I'm a great big fan of how everything is currently arranged, but I have a challenge in my mind looking at the continuation of the data methodology that's presented to us and saying that we need to have an additional workforce. And with that being said, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay with you, the one person that we haven't really heard from, I'd like, at least on a budgetary basis, if not I guess a city administration basis, hear from our city administrator as to what she thinks or has thought about this topic.
Well, since we haven't even talked about passing this motion, I mean, is that maybe premature, do you think? Or, I mean, I'll recognize her and have her talk about that if you want, but
I'd like to hear what she has to say.
okay, all right, with that in mind, he's asking, I guess you're asking a question about where would we find the money to do this, essentially? Is that what you're saying?
Where would we find the money to do this for 2020, for example, and on an ongoing basis, and also based upon what she has heard as our city administrator, does she think that this report produces findings that would conclude, or has she concluded on her own, that she agrees with the added request for more police officers?
Well, since our city administrator is not an elected official, I don't know that I necessarily would ask her to weigh in on a piece of legislation that we're talking about, but she's certainly welcome to give her opinion if she wants to, I suppose. Okay, so thank you. With that in mind, I'll recognize Paula.
Well, you know, the reason why I went to graduate school was so that I would not become ever an elected official.
You've assiduously avoided this topic.
Definitely.
Right.
So, you know, we talk about political administration dichotomy in graduate school, and I don't want to get in the middle of what easily becomes a political conversation. But from a policy conversation and from data analysis and much more from fiscal responsibility, we provided you a balanced budget. What the departments provided was not a balanced budget. It was going into the fund balance to almost the tune of $1 million. So in order for us to balance any budget, not just this year, but in prior years, we have to prioritize on what is an absolute necessary need. And a lot of things we receive from departments are nice to haves. It's not critical that we do it right this minute. So what we're able to do is push them off to a future year. And we did that in this current budget. You look at streets, there was a time where it was a priority for the board to do a lot of streets, and we were able to, when the fund balance was lower, 15%, we were able to take money from general fund to do a lot of streets. We still have a few streets left, but you know, current conditions, sales tax revenue, we push some of those streets off to future years. So what I presented you is a balanced budget. If this committee makes a recommendation to look for funding, we'll take a look at first blush. What was presented is not really feasible. So we know we have to go back and look at what we can defer. So we're deferring things to make this work for 2020. we need to look comprehensively, not just 2020, how this really becomes sustainable for the immediate future. So if there's a positive recommendation tonight, that's what I'm gonna have to go back and do, look at what Karen has put together, talk to departments that it's impacting, and see whether this makes sense. And if it doesn't, what are the consequences? And all of that is what we present to Ways and Means on Thursday.
Very good, thank you. Did you want
And Alderman Kramer, I just wanted to highlight that on the Ways and Means Committee, we've had 3 different special meetings reviewing the budget, and early on, sensing that this would become an issue, we asked staff to kind of have a contingent amendment in the works in the event a positive recommendation is, would come forward to hire these 2 police officers, even though it's not currently in the draft that you received or that we received. And what I can say is that we had a first iteration at the last meeting, and they're working on it. So in terms of how will we find the money, they're working on they're working on a proposal. So
the consideration for this committee might be: does it have to be 2? Can it be 1?
Yeah, I think that's a decent point too. I would just say, kind of in response to Alderman Kramer a little bit, I think there's a danger, and I would take issue with any analysis that is completely data driven. And I think Dove said it well at the outset of his explanation, that he said this is, you should not be making personnel decisions strictly on the basis of numbers. That there's more to it than that. And I think this is an example of where that might be more true than typically. Secondly, I would say with regard to the money issue, Proposition P pours over $400,000 into this community every single year. And the people that voted that into existence, I think voted it for specifically these kind of expenditures. I mean, they specifically contemplated the idea that this was going to put more police on the street. That's how it was advertised, and that's how it was sold to the voting public. So I think that, I think that's one example of, I think there are ways that we should be able to figure out how to make this work. The other thing I would just point out is our police force is right now at historic lows. 25. We haven't had as few as 25 officers in the city of Brentwood for decades. And it's decades in which we have expanded our retail district by 200, 300%. We have put more and more claims on our police force and our fire department, and it made it harder and harder for them to do their jobs because of how important this area is on a retail basis, and because we insist that we have neighborhoods that are safe and we have neighborhoods that are accessible, and we put a lot of time and effort into making them so, but it puts a lot of stress and strain on our officers and the people that keep our cities safe. The other thing I would just say is, we are, I think there's no question that our police force, as an example, is doing more with less in these last couple of years. And I think that stress has a long-term effect. And I think that you are going to make this community, in an era when it is difficult already to attract new officers, because we have less officers coming out of the various academies and are wanting to go into this line of work in the first place, that's a smaller pool, and it is more competitive to get after these individuals. And we are making it harder and harder on our police officers to continue to provide the high level of service that we all demand. And I think that this would be a step in the direction of, reversing that trend, at least to some extent. Is there anybody else that has any other comment or discussion with regard to this motion?
I don't think Prop P was ever, if any of the citizens here in Brentwood thought we were gonna get more officers from Prop P, the county was gonna get more officers. But I never believed we would see some money, but I don't think it necessarily was gonna go to officers.
What was your sense that the money was going to go for?
Well, what we're spending it on, equipment, needs, and that sort of thing. I think the county sold it as more officers. and they got their more officers and were able to raise the pay. But I don't think it was ever promised that any municipality would have to automatically go get more officers.
I'm not suggesting it's a mandate, I'm just saying that I think there's an expectation that was created by the way it was sold to the voting public.
We tend to bite off a lot of that, don't we?
I guess, I mean, we can disagree about that, I
Yeah,
just,
I don't know.
obviously.
Just my,
Any other discussion? I understand. Any other discussion?
He's
Uh,
raising his-
Did you have another, I'm sorry, Tom, I didn't see you, go ahead, please.
Kinda hard to see.
It's okay, sorry about that.
No, it's all
I
right.
just want to say, Mr. Chairman and Alderwoman Sims, I completely respect the fact that what you've said and your opinions, and you know, I'm like I said before, we've had this conversation before.
Yeah.
I'm willing to take another look at it at the Board of Aldermen level when we all are together. But I guess the only thing I have to wrestle with at the moment of this vote is I can't ignore the data. And it is, to me, sufficiently in line with what they found before that I can only ask the question as we get closer to this determination, if there's any way at all that we can, as perhaps Alderman Lockmiller has suggested, maybe there's a way we can rearrange some things. Maybe there's some conversations out of the box on our deployment that we can have. Again, I respect the fact that we have our differences.
Sure. Thank you. Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Chairman Plufka,
Yes.
Alderman Kramer,
No,
Alderman Lockmiller,
no,
Alderwoman Sims.
Yes.
2-2.
So with a 2-2 recommendation, it's a sort of, it's a neutral or,
It's dead.
okay. So I can't bring it to the full
The
board?
last time we did that, the mayor, and I had a conversation that when there's a tie vote, that means, you know, there's no recommendation really going forward to the board, and I need to respect that. Which is one of the reasons why we pulled the fence off. So we need to be consistent in how we apply the votes from these committees to the board.
But the fence was discussed at the full Board of Aldermen.
But it was taken off the agenda, he brought it up, and the board voted to put it on. So maybe if you wanna put this on the agenda that way, I can't put it on the agenda.
Okay. So you mean I need another alderman to place it on the agenda? So 2 aldermen would place it on the agenda? Okay. But it won't come as a result of this committee action? Very good. Thank you. Okay, go back to my trustee. Do we have any citizens? Is there anybody here that would like to make a citizen
There are
comment?
no citizens here.
Yeah.
He's a citizen, but
Oh.
he's not a, s-
Yeah.
not in Brentwood.
Okay.
What?
Very good, thank you. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
so moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all those in favor?
I.
Aye. Very good. You're in favor of adjournment?
You vote yes on
Very good.
adjournment?
All right, man.
Thank you, Tom.
Enjoy your trip, safe travels.